Hello, my name is Christopher Lowitz, and in this presentation, I and my co-authors Grant Shepard and Dr. Joel Kaufman will discuss our research into anti-forensics and obfuscation techniques and their effect on cloud forensics. Our problem domain is digital forensics and the investigation of computer crimes. Like other criminals, digital criminals use anti-forensic techniques to evade investigators by disrupting evidence and derailing investigations. Grant and I have some investigative experience with anti-forensics on PCs, Macs, and mobile devices, but not in the cloud. And existing research in this area is a bit limited. To understand how anti-forensics works in cloud investigations, we synthesized several cloud instances with user activity, attempted to cover our activities with a variety of techniques, and then analyzed images of the instances to see how well our obfuscation techniques actually worked. We believe that anti-forensics in the cloud poses a greater risk than we originally realized. We'll begin with some simplifying definitions. Forensics scientifically studies evidence to establish who did what and when. All forensics, dealing with computers or not, is predicated on two principles. First, just by making contact with the crime scene, a criminal will inevitably leave evidence. In digital context, it's a timestamp on a file, a bash history log, etc. Second, each piece of evidence is unique and has played an irrevocable role in some timeline. Anti-forensics exploits these underlying principles by attempting to get rid of evidence or manipulate its uniqueness. And there are digital analogs to destroying security tapes, disposing of bloody clothes across town, forging a threatening note, or wearing rubber gloves. Cloud investigations face challenges that are unique from the rest of digital forensics. Investigators usually rely on finite forensic images, but cloud storage is virtually infinite, and investigators likely can't image an entire data center. While investigators can normally seize, touch, or at least look at digital evidence, cloud investigators have reduced, if any, access to cloud infrastructure. The data center of interest could be jurisdictions away, and even if it's nearby, the cloud service provider could be uncooperative or bound by privacy laws. Cloud evidence consists of much more than just disk images. There are user logs that may or may not be retained by cloud service providers, network traffic to and from data centers, user history on suspects' local devices, and on and on and on. Cloud data is volatile and ephemeral. Data may be deleted or overwritten at any time before investigators obtain it as evidence. Finally, multi-tenancy and shared storage introduces privacy concerns for other users whose data may be co-located or intermingled with the data sought by investigators. If those challenges aren't significant enough, then they are exacerbated by anti-forensics techniques whose effectiveness can be magnified by any or all of the above issues.
After we created our base images, we then populated each instance with different patterns of user activity. This activity included downloading and installing various programs, downloading, creating, and modifying text files, creating and modifying folder structures, and using various installed programs. We kept detailed records of all user activity, which we did not share with each other until after initial analysis. After populating each instance with user activity, we imaged each instance. We then conducted anti-forensic activities on each instance, which is detailed in the next section, again keeping records of every action taken. Finally, we re-imaged immediately after anti-forensic activities. In order to analyze the data we created, we used the following forensic tools and methodologies. The primary forensic tool we used was Autopsy, which is a robust open-source forensics tool that is used to analyze and investigate a wide range of digital evidence. We chose Autopsy for its robust capabilities because it is supported by a large community of forensics investigators. It has a rich and intuitive GUI, it is cross-platform compatible, and it is free. Closed source tools such as FTK and Ncase cost thousands of dollars for a single license, so we were unable to use those tools as part of this investigation. We created a new case in Autopsy for each of our Amazon EC2 instance images. After creating each case, we ran a series of Autopsy ingest modules that formed a sequence of analytical tasks over all files, directories, and unallocated space in each image. These tasks took 4 to 6 hours per 8 GB EC2 image. These ingest modules helped us review recent activity, categorize files, analyze pictures, review embedded files, conduct keyword searches, find potentially encrypted files, carve deleted files from unallocated space, and other such tasks. We also reviewed the OS metadata and IP addresses in Autopsy and FTK Imager, which is the free version of FTK. We inspected the bash history if it was available. We manually parsed the file systems to review user-created directories and other evidence in various user folders. We also analyzed the APT logs and reviewed the programs that were installed. This was generally how we found data that was not hidden. These techniques are generally used for doing an initial review of a forensic image when there is no suspicion of hidden data. We use these techniques on all the images to determine what we could find without trying to find hidden data.
We use Ryan Harris's 2006 Digital Anti-Forensics Taxonomy as a playbook to obfuscate our cloud instances. Grant and I each focused one cloud instance on each technique and then combined all techniques into a super instance. First, we each devoted one instance to hiding data. We downloaded some files from the internet and created new files from the command line and then deleted them without overwriting or secure deleting them. We also appended some files together and performed some basic steganography with photos. Everything here used basic Linux commands like rm, touch, wget, makedir, mv, and cat. Next, we upped the ante and each destroyed data in an instance by using secure file deletion tools. We used some tools that we installed via apt-get, like wipe, along with some tools included in the Ubuntu distro, like shred. In our third set of instances, we eliminated the sources of evidence, preventing evidence from being created in the first place. We logged in, disabled bash history and activity logging, performed some random and innocuous activity like creating and deleting files, then re-enabled logs and logged out. We accomplished this by stopping the systemd journal service and disabling rsyslog and bash history. In our fourth and penultimate set of images, we counterfeited evidence to confuse investigators. We added users to our cloud instances and gave those fake personas ownership of our incriminating files. We also manipulated file metadata and backdated file timestamps. Finally, we each created a super instance where we layered all of the previous anti-forensics tools together. We disabled logs, downloaded and deleted files, created users, tampered with timestamps, reassigned ownership, and so forth before re-enabling logs and deleting what little evidence of logging that we could find.
Our experimental methodology was as follows. We first reviewed the images created by each other that were taken after anti-forensic images had been reviewed. We wrote down what we could find for each image and tried to guess or determine what anti-forensic techniques had been used. We then reviewed the corresponding images prior to the use of anti-forensic images and again wrote down what we found. Finally, we reviewed the manual user activity logs we created when populating instances with user data. To check the effectiveness of certain anti-forensic techniques, we conducted keyword searches of images with data from activity logs to see if any data at all was recoverable. The reason we did this was to avoid any guilty knowledge from affecting our analysis of the effectiveness of anti-forensic techniques. By first examining the post-anti-forensic images, we had access to the least amount of possible data that could be recovered. We then were able to review the untampered images only after analysis of the images that had anti-forensic techniques connected on them had been completed. When we analyzed the pre-anti-forensic images, we were able to determine how effective the various anti-forensic techniques were. Finally, when we reviewed the logs, we were able to confirm that our forensic techniques were effective in the first place. We will describe how effective our general forensic techniques were and how effective each anti-forensic technique was in the evaluation section. When we first reviewed the images that had been obfuscated by digital forensic techniques, we used a specific set of methodologies to try to find any evidence of these anti-forensic techniques or recover any hidden or deleted or overwritten data. However, when looking for recovered data, it is often more of an art than a science. We first reviewed the overactivity in FTK imager and autopsy to determine what was easy to find. Next, we used autopsy to reconstruct deleted files in unallocated space or free disk space. We also reviewed any user or system logs that were available or that we could find. We also conducted a manual analysis of the folder structure for each image, and finally did keyword searches based on our findings in the previous steps. From our experience doing an investigation, you often find smaller pieces of the puzzle and then try to put the puzzle together, knowing you may be missing one or more pieces that would make the investigation far easier. We also tried to find what was missing, or what should be there, or what would be there in a normal case where there were no anti-forensic techniques used. Overall, we also did guesses or educated guesses based on the previous analysis that was done, so that each step was iterative, and we tried to find additional data based on everything we had found so far. Our paper reviews 4 unique anti-forensic techniques and the effect of combining these techniques. The techniques we studied included hiding evidence, destroying evidence, eliminating sources of evidence, and counterfeiting evidence. When we reviewed the post-anti-forensic images where evidence had been hidden, we determined that it was only moderately effective. Each of us was able to find some of the data that had been hidden, and doing keyword searches of the content of the hidden data did reveal all of the hidden data. We found that destroying evidence was highly effective, and when data was overwritten, that there was little to no trace of the overwritten or destroyed evidence, as long as the evidence had been destroyed correctly and effectively. We found that eliminating sources of evidence was also highly effective. Disabling logs, for example, provided no evidence and did not record any user activity when logs were disabled. Counterfeiting evidence was a little dependent on the methodology used. In one example, we were able to find logs that indicated that evidence had been counterfeited, but without reviewing the logs, there was little to no evidence that the data had been counterfeited. Combining methodologies, we concluded, was entirely effective. While some of the techniques above would not work together very well, when evidence was hidden and then destroyed, it made it impossible to recover this data. When evidence was counterfeited and the logs were erased, so combining counterfeiting evidence and destroying evidence, we found that there was zero trace of any untoward or inappropriate or any evidence at all of the anti-forensic techniques. We also found that eliminating sources of evidence and then destroying the logs or other associated evidence that the logs had been disabled was again entirely effective.
In summary, in response to the limited research in cloud anti-forensics, we conducted a series of base case experiments to determine the effectiveness of common obfuscation techniques and the ways that forensic investigators attempt to defeat them. Our experiments demonstrated that some basic methods of deleting and hiding data were ineffective and could readily be defeated by analysis of open source tools, but only when investigators obtained forensic images before operating systems overwrite unallocated storage. On the other hand, overwriting user data, disabling and destroying logs, clearing recent user activity, and combinations of all those techniques rendered analysis almost entirely ineffective. Since we assessed that any malevolent actor would likely layer multiple obfuscation techniques together, either on purpose or by chance, our overall conclusion is that anti-forensics remains a clear and present danger to cloud investigations. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to answering any questions.